Okay. So I just want to redo that. I just want to extend a super warm welcome to Markus Troeltzsch, who's joining us from Germany today. And we've really been looking forward to having him with us. I heard Markus talking probably about 5 or 6 weeks ago in the roundtable conversation with Christian Coachman and 200 other delegates around the world. And everything he had to say just came from such a logical place. And I couldn't get enough. And I mean, we really honored Markus. We're really excited to have you with us. And I want you to give us some background in terms of what you do, what type of practice you run, and then from there, we're going to let this conversation unfold.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with you guys, especially in a digital dental society. Beautiful. I'm basically a max-fax surgeon, and I've prepared a little bit to share with you guys. I'll try to have that pop up. Do you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. It says it's streaming. Anyway, while I'm trying to get this running, I'm a max-fax surgeon. Anything up on the screen now?
Yep, we've got you.
Ah, beautiful. I'm a max-fax surgeon, so I'm trained several countries around the world, including Australia. And Bego and Geistlich are supporting me at the moment. As you said, we're doing quite some lectures on this topic right now. And the time has just become very consuming. So I thank these companies for supporting. I did everything about this with my brother. You can see him to the left here, is the bald guy. He also went for his PhD. It's something I skipped. And we're both maxillofacial surgeons and dentists. So we're in our office at home. It's been existing for more than 75 years now. To the right is my dad. He's inherited that office from his dad. So we're basically there for quite a while now. And what we mainly do is surgery, especially focusing on people who do have health issues or not healthy. That goes, of course, also into the infectious part, where we have always been focused on like HIV and stuff, which is, of course, for a surgeon quite interesting, right? And just to show you guys something, we're in a digital dental world. This is kind of augmentation I love to do, a 3D digital mesh, titanium individual, just to augment the defect. Here's a case in the front area, right, where we would need to augment this area. This is how it looks in situ, and this is how the implants look in here. That's what we do on a regular basis. Or in this case, he became quite famous because he really was challenging us on a scientifically and also craftsman side, as he had no bone left after multiple failed procedures, multiple issues health-wise. And here we went for hip grafts to replace everything. You can see it in the cone beam here, and did 3D printed bars to retain inches, right? So just to show you guys what I do in a normal life. So I'm not a virologist. I'm not a pro in hygiene. We basically came to that after we published our thoughts that we've been focusing on for quite a while. As we followed that pandemic spread from China, it first hit Italy very badly. You probably still know that from the news, right? And we started preparing our office from beginning of March on, and we established a protocol that we just shared with everybody. Now, in the preparation of this, Sam, we have been talking about some pandemic things. And there's a beautiful paper from 2004 that said, and that's the first SARS virus, SARS-CoV-1, how dental splatter included pathogens. And they focused on measles, tuberculosis, SARS. I want to pick tuberculosis from them to look at, right? And I love Wikipedia for just a general overview. So tuberculosis is quite interesting for us, as it's been around for so long, right? It's known to medicine for centuries. And it's a pathogen of the respiratory system, of the lungs a lot. And it's getting more and more interesting for us because loads of the new cases are multi-drug resistant. So it's really, really hard to treat that disease. Now, everybody always thought that it's just coughing that transmits tuberculosis. So you see the similarities to SARS-CoV-1 and 2 where we're working at. So everybody was focusing for a while on, is it just cough or also breathing? And here comes the next thing, the aerosol picture, right? We're talking so much about aerosols in dentistry, while usually we mean dental spray, whereas a huge issue. Now, bronchial aerosols, that's also the aerosol we fear a lot during COVID-19. That's the little droplets that are generated in the lungs that cause huge issues, because that's exactly where the pathogens comes from, and it brings a burst of pathogens to us, right? That's why intubation, extubation is so dangerous in these patients. And nothing of that is new. As you can see, this is all tuberculosis knowledge. So where it is, where it's in the area, where the aerosol comes from, it's very important that exhaled air from patients who have tuberculosis contains basically the genetic information of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So all these findings we're having right now, that there is RNA, sorry, that's hard to say, RNA samples of that virus around the patients who breathe. That's nothing new. That is something that other diseases, for instance, tuberculosis, also feature. And also the question, how easily can we get infected, is not new. And again, tuberculosis is a forerunner of this. And here you can see, that's an old study, 20 years old, from Croatia, where we met with our good friend Roy, right? What demonstrated that nurses who worked in tuberculosis centers had a risk more than 17 times higher than normal nurses that are not in these centers. So a huge infection issue. Did you discuss tuberculosis in dental patients lately somewhere? Nobody did. But we have rising numbers in the Western world everywhere, right? So do our masks protect? Now everybody talks about SARS-CoV-2 could maybe possibly have an effect on our masks. Here you can see that if you test that on guinea pigs, not wearing masks, 69 of 90 get infected. With masks, still 36 of 90. So no safety in our masks against tuberculosis. Very, very, very important. Sorry, I need a little zip here. And you see these different mask types, and that's why all over the world, the requirements for treating tuberculosis patients is respirators, not surgical masks, as it's scientifically proven they don't protect us. Still, quite some of the tuberculosis patients are totally asymptomatic. And we know that the exhaled air from tuberculosis patients contains bacteria. We don't know whether they're infective, but they don't know they're contained. So that's a topic we should discuss also, like in the future. As there's, as I said, rising numbers, multi-drug resistant, and they surpass our surgical masks we wear in our standard life. So also, again, very important here. There are studies that show that probably respirators have no significant advantage in clinical settings compared to surgical masks, and which is a lot based on the finding that surgical respirators are pretty hard to handle in the long run. And again, here it's they filter better, yes, but, and that's a German paper. It's just an English summary. I'll have that out for you. It shows that there's no reliable data that face masks or respirators have a different efficiency of protecting us. Still, everybody says, we should wear respirators. And now just have a look at another disease, a disease that we feared, but that, thank God, has passed us. Still, at the moment, we don't know, that could strike us everywhere. That's H5N1, an influenza virus known as the avian flu. Now, the mortality is somewhere, as you can see on the right on the chart, around 60%, maybe as low as 14 to 33%. Sources aren't clear. So huge mortality rates. Why didn't this cause a big issue? Because that virus didn't do the last mutation to be easily spread from human to human. But that mutation can happen everywhere. And another big disease we should talk about is Ebola. Now, Ebola is a very important virus. As you know, it's been up in the media high, and you guys are closer to the issue as I am. However, in the University Clinic of Göttingen, where I've been working a while, we also had cases that featured that disease. So it came very close. And interesting, in the medical literature, you find that there's no spread in the air of Ebola. That's has been in multiple studies in the textbooks, even on Wikipedia. You can see that it said that's direct body contact, direct body fluids. And if we look closer into this, entry points for the virus include the nose, mouth, eyes, open wound, cuts, and abrasions. And here's the first stop: the nose, mouth, and eyes. That's what we know are the possible entry ports for SARS-CoV-2. So again, a disease that's extensively researched that may feature the same entry points into our body as the one we're researching right now. And here's again stated that primates sharing the same air didn't have any cross-infection. However, there's coming up evidence that maybe there could be an aerosol threat, and the further you go into that, the more you find evidence that somehow a spread apart from body fluids could be reasonable. And all of a sudden, experiments pop up that can actually show that primates can become infected when sharing the same infected air. And it's also a dose that can lead to death. It's a fairly old study, 20 years old, right? But again, it's something just to demonstrate. We sometimes don't know what we are facing for a very long time. Sometimes knowledge is evolving somewhere down the road. So we're now facing a virus with new strains. It's not a new virus, but with new strains. And this somehow explains how unsettled and how uneasy authorities and practitioners are with the situation. However, we can't hope for a quick solution of this. And as you can see, was just a quick glimpse into Ebola research of 20 years, and it's still not completely covered that question, right? So if we look into what troubles us right now, SARS-CoV-2, that's the virus, right? COVID-19 is the disease, and Corona is the nickname we need. A very important thing, and maybe the most important part of this lecture: transmission is not synonym to infection. That is so vastly important. It's especially true for viruses, especially for SARS-CoV-2. Of course, for other diseases as well. But here it's very important.
Sorry, Markus, can I stop you there? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes.
The difference between transmission and infection.
Absolutely. When we look into our media, when we look even into our professional literature, you could derive from that, oh, everybody who is hit by one virus of SARS-CoV-2 will be infected and probably die. But that's simply not true. You need a certain amount of viruses that enter susceptible areas to even have the possibility of an infection. And that is so important. For instance, if you go through a grocery store and touch a surface where this virus is sticking to, and it can stick to surfaces for quite a prolonged time, but if you afterwards simply wash your hands, nothing will happen, although that virus was transmitted to your body. Is that enough explanation for that?
100%. I think it just clarifies that issue.
It's maybe the most important part of understanding that we're facing a very serious disease, that we have to be careful not to get infected, but on the other side, there's no need to panic, right? We just have to handle it with care, with proper hygiene protocols. But if we do that, we will probably get that virus transmitted. Maybe everybody of you guys had contact to that virus, got it transmitted, but none of you, hopefully, got infected. And, you know, in our office in Germany, dental offices were not closed down. We were working through that pandemic. We had some measurements installed. We had less patients. We had social distancing. We had disinfection, everything. But we faced that virus. And we also faced COVID-19 patients in our office knowing they were infected, and with the proper precaution, nothing happened.
So Markus, I'm gonna stop you there for a second. So what you're showing and what you're saying, just to reiterate, is that we've always, as a dental profession, been exposed to significant threats.
Absolutely.
At large, to a lot of this was, we were literally unconscious to it. We weren't aware of the threat that we were exposed to. And yet, if you look at the literature, you don't see many infections. So there could have been transmissions, but you don't see many infections. The one thing, before you carry on, that I want to touch on, HPV. That is something that we see all the time. Yeah. How many dentists out there are vaccinated for HPV? And it comes down. I think it boils down to the same discussion, in the sense that
you're perfectly right.
Yeah, I'll just say, and again, Munich Beer Fest. And just by the way, this is like a cocktail hour theme. But we told Markus that sadly in South Africa there are no cocktails because there's no alcohol on sale at the moment. So we'll just imagine what it would have been like. But I was on a webinar, I think last night or the night before, and without being blasé or without being taking a lot of stuff and touching wood, what I did mention is that in the last 20 years, if you can you hear me?
Yeah,
perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the last 20 years, I've had 2 days of sick leave where I've been sick that I couldn't come to work, where I was ill, and I've been working in an environment which is obviously hostile, apparently. But I think what I'm saying is that, the measures that we've been taking have been sufficient to protect me from transmissions or being infected. So the disease is there.
Absolutely. And Markus, just on that topic, so like you said, through the pandemic, all the dental practices in Germany were open. There was no shutdown of dental practices in Germany. We had a comment on our WhatsApp group I think it was yesterday sometime, and similarly for Sweden and similarly for South Korea. And the question I want to ask you is that during the time that these dental practices were open in Germany, was there any limitation in terms of the procedures that you offered to your patients, firstly? And secondly, I know that from the last comment, there has been no reported cases of any nosocomial infections affecting either dentist or patient for that matter.
Absolutely right. I really tried to get on the numbers and try to find a case that is proven to be infected during work while handling the PPE properly. I cannot. And the second thing is, yes, no shutdown. We had no official limitations of procedures. What we did cut down is professional hygiene settings. We reduced those, and we tried to, if we conduct them with as little splatter as possible. So we tried not to use an air scaler and stuff like this, right? But that were minor things that were up to the office owner how to use them. Now, what we saw is that we had enhanced our hygiene settings in our office, right? Quite a bit, with full masks all the time, always hand sanitations. And when we compare our sick leave in our office between March and May due to like cold-like diseases, we're nearly down to 0 in those 2 months in 2020, while we had a reasonable number in 2019 in the same time. So that tells me quite a bit about our handling of hygiene before that, right? Yeah. One thing to say, just to take out of the lecture just before, if you just adhere and stick to the hygiene protocols we all should have adhered to all the time in January, would be good.
But this is the thing, Markus. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, you look at you look at historically what we've been saying, and you know, you look at all the infection control and cross-contamination measures that we put in. And, you know, like we briefly had a chat around my clinical setting, for example, and I've got a lot of people to look after, and there's a lot of clinicians that work there. And, you know, just to implement infection control measures on the most basic level is really complicated. And I'm not saying it's complicated, but it's easy to make a mistake. And it's not so easy not to make a mistake. So, you know, the whole thing for us, you know, we knuckled down through the lockdown because we were locked down. And we re-looked at everything on the most basic level in terms of how is that piece of instrument going to move from the autoclave into our surgery, and from the surgery, how's it going to move back, and what we're going to do in that workflow. So exactly as you say, you know, we've got to stick to effective measures of infection control, and we've got to continue with that cycle for every single patient that we see. And I think
absolutely.
And this brings me to my next question, Markus. I mean, during the time, can you describe to us what your infection control measures were at the practice and what level of PPE you utilized? And I know that you've treated a lot of COVID positive patients through this time period, so your exposure was a lot higher. I'd like to get some feedback from you in terms of what did your PPE look like? What do your infection control measures look like?
That's very easy to answer. It's also all published on our website, right? So everybody can download that if you want to read through that. So
Brilliant.
Number one, the moment we had that outbreak in Italy, we had the rule that everybody working in our office has to wear a surgical face mask all the time. The moment they enter the office, better the moment before they enter the office, until they leave the office. The moment they come into the office, the first thing is wash your hands, disinfect your hands. And disinfect your hands when you enter an operatory, and disinfect your hands when you leave an operatory. So they were always disinfecting their hands. We asked our staff mid-March to wear surgical masks when they go grocery shopping, long before anybody even talked about that. Because, and that's the slide I'm demonstrating right now, the problem with the virus we're facing is the droplet transmission. It's not the airborne transmission. And as I outlined in the studies about Ebola, there is still questions open. We don't see a clinical relevant idea, even a hint of airborne transmission, which would be somebody sneezes into a room, you enter that room 10 minutes later, and the virus still sits in the air and attacks you. But what we know happens is that if somebody coughs at you and you catch the droplets of the cough, then you got a transmission. Not an infection, but then you got a transmission for sure, right? So it's these droplets that evolve while speaking, while talking, while sneezing, coughing, all that. That is what poses the risk. And so we formed everything around knowing that this is the primary risk. We know that through touching infected surfaces and retouching others, you can spread the virus. So we cleared our office rooms, that there's nothing standing around that is not utterly necessary for the ongoing procedure, and made sure we can disinfect everything fine. And I'll show that in a second also. Normal swipe disinfection, as you've been using it for 10 years or longer, works perfectly fine on that virus. It's not a new virus. It's a virus that's been researched since the 1930s, and that's completely covered with your hygiene and sterilization protocols. So what we had to make sure is that the distancing and the wearing of masks and the hand sanitizing, that these were good, and we enforced that strictly. And on top, we included a telephone triage. So we called the patients the day before they come into the office and asked them if there's any signs or symptoms of the disease. And when they enter the office, we ask them again. So we have a time window of 24 hours where we double check if they have no symptoms. And still, I'm sure I've treated asymptomatic patients who a little later were proven to be COVID-19 positive. However, we know that there's a risk of transmission even for those patients who are asymptomatic. But if you make sure no droplets from them hit your susceptible areas, you're good.
Yeah. Good. So
and And that is the second. Allow me to finish that slide with it, because that's so important with transmission. Before a transmitted virus can lead to infection, you need inoculation, which means the transmitted virus sits on a part of my skin, facial skin, maybe here, but here it can't do any harm. So if I make sure I disinfect that area of my skin or I wash it off, I'm good. But if it comes to an area that is susceptible for that virus, and additionally to that has a sufficient dose, then it can cause the infection. So we have to find out, where does it hit us, right? And furthermore, and that's a very unsettling study for me, it's from March 19th from Finland, where they already showed that there's a mutation in the virus, right? So much to immunity, so much to vaccination. We need inoculation, and transmission itself is not the problem. Any more questions we should enter and look into right now?
So I have a question for you. In terms of for dentists to kind of understand risks, and I think you're 100% that, and I would say just in my practice that what I realized also one of the weak areas was not the patient and staff interaction, because we're so honed at this area, the treatment rooms and treating patients, but it was what happened outside in the with the staff between themselves, the admin staff and this was the highest for me, the biggest risk, because our staff members are going out and they're going to supermarkets and they're not wearing masks, and then they come into our offices. So almost every 2 days we have a discussion with the staff about these protocols that we're talking about, to keep all of us safe, that we don't bring it in, because we're so worried about this coming from the patients that we sometimes don't realize that there are many other ways it can come into our practices. But
the biggest risk,
yes, is our
the
staff.
biggest risk for your office is you and your staff who catch that while they're outside of the office. Of course, inside of the office, you're well protected all the time anyway.
Yes. So we have almost 2 days. We have a reminder. We have a staff meeting to go through these protocols to keep everyone safe. I tell them it's for them and their families, and then it spreads almost like the virus if you spread the safety. But I have a question about the transmission, and obviously we've spent so much time in dentistry about wearing the masks and protecting ourselves, which masks are relevant. But the question really is about our eyes, and I think that for a lot of dentists, we're using loupes and microscopes. And, is the risk of transmission, and maybe you can't answer it, the same between the mouth and the eyes, or is there a little bit of a different in terms of risk factor for us?
Thank you for asking. This is a beautiful study that focuses exactly on that question, and it comes out that it's proven it can enter through the mucous membranes of nose and larynx, period. We think that there might probably maybe be a risk for the eyes. This is why this is not enough. This is why we wear goggles. But there is not one single study right now that proves that it can really enter through the eyes. And both the German health authorities and the WHO say that there's a hypothetical risk, so you protect your eyes. But the level of evidence we have for that is so much lower than for nose and mouth.
That's really interesting, and it doesn't mean that we can stop, worrying about this route of infection, and we have to find a solution for us, because I think that's the weakest area again for us to protect. Often, if we're using magnification and the stuff that we've become so used to, but we have to start to focus on that. So, just one other question: when you went back to the TB study with nurses working in TB environments at the greater risk, are you aware of any studies that have shown dentists or dental staff being more prone to infections in general, or maybe respiratory infections? Are there any studies to show that we are really a higher risk versus?
I've heavily researched that in the last weeks, and I couldn't find a single study that showed that. There are studies for healthcare workers in general, like the Croatian nurses, right? There are studies on influenza and healthcare workers, but there's really not a single study of quality that I could find where healthcare workers, dental workers, and normal population is compared. No clue. Furthermore, I was very happy to follow 2 webinars with Professor Bian from Wuhan. He's the dean of the dental schools there. And he stated, and he also shows in his webinar, however, that's not published, at least I didn't see it published yet, that compared to medical staff during the first phase of the outbreak, when nobody knew what they were facing, relatively a lot less dental workers were infected compared to medical workers. And he thinks that this is based in the fact that dentists and dental staff members are used to protecting themselves with masks, gloves, maybe goggles, compared to medical staff who even in intensive care wards usually don't wear that. That was the same for me when I was working at the university, right? When I was going through the wards, I was never wearing a surgical mask. Why should I? But that's the point. When we know it's transmitted by coughing at you, a surgical mask helps quite a bit. And I'll show you data from Wuhan later that shows that with the proper security measurements, even in the fever clinics and in the intensive care units, there were any further recorded infections in the medical personnel. So protection helps, yes. And the data Professor Bian published, there is a publication out there, showed that during the outbreak, about 0.47% of everybody in that dental clinic setting was infected. So it was, I hope I recall correctly, 9 out of 2,000. And of these 9, probably half of them were probably infected in a private setting. So the risk for dental staff is not.
Another interesting point that was brought up, I don't remember where, was that in medical versus dental, if we look at kind of the nursing on nurse to patient ratio, in a dental surgery, the nurse to patient ratio is generally 1-to-1, where often when you go to medical environments, there's 1 nurse for 20 patients. And so in terms of the cleaning and the maintenance and checking the patients not coughing and spreading and doing things that they shouldn't do, I was like, that's really a fact that I've never thought about as to why, maybe we managed transmission so well, or managed not to allow transmission so efficiently, because we have this interactive with our patients almost on a one-on-one or even 2-on-1 when there's a dentist and an assistant working with that one member.
I agree, Mark. There's so many factors that are beneficial for dentistry.
So,
Sorry,
I mean, once again, it points to the fact that, I mean, we've been exposed to so much. And yet, if you look at the literature and you look at the research, and I mean, I've also spent extensive time over the last few weeks looking at, are there any documented cases? And I mean, there's very little. So, Markus, we could honestly have you with us the whole night, but I know that you've got another webinar, and there's 3 points that we still need to touch on. One is aerosol. Second is masks, comparing and giving you input on that. And then the last thing is we're going to talk about fogging units, and we've literally got about 20-25 minutes to get through. So,
So we'll speed that up a little bit, right? Let's look into dental spray and aerosols. Can I? Yeah, perfect. Can I share my screen again, please?
There we go.
Wonderful. So we know that our high volume suction, like the one installed on every dental chair, is highly efficient in reducing the spray that comes out of the patient's mouth towards us. And thanks to Howie and Tommy, we did some experiments on that. We were just sharing the ideas for a prolonged time. And this is our regular dental handpiece, right? And look at how much water spray comes out of this. You see all those droplets, and very important is as soon as I cut the water supply, all those droplets rain down for good. Yeah, you still see them coming down. That's so much water in the air. And now if we do the same thing, we have water spraying it up into the air all the time, and then we wait, and then we let a suction unit come in. That's the high volume suction, but it only helps where it is, right? Where it's not, you can even see on the upper right, still droplets coming down. Third setup, suction is active, and you see how first the small and then the bigger droplets are sucked into that high volume suction device, reducing that spray, and that spray cloud was going up to nearly 1 meter, right? And with that, it's about 10 to 15 centimeters. And the most important thing is, when I cut the water supply, it's gone right away. So let's transfer that to the oral cavity. Like, there's loads of stills where you can beautifully show how this suction efficiently works. And that's a side thing. I've seen on so many Facebook groups and dental groups advertisements for gadgets that plug onto this high volume suction part of the dental chair and have some kind of extra oral device and shows how beautiful that is. That's, in my humble opinion, just the wrong way to go. As we can see, this is the active suction in the oral cavity, right? You see how concentrated that spray is. Versus same setup, we even had to angle the handpiece away so that we don't get totally sprayed and that we still can operate the camera where everything's foggy, right? If you compare that directly, you can see how much water is in the air when the suction is not active. Whereas when it's active and we have indicator shields in front of us, we can see if it's handled properly, there's absolutely zero humidity coming to us. And now knowing when we transmit SARS-CoV-2, we need those little bigger droplets. If there's nothing landing on you, you're good. So this shows how important that suction is. And this is my normal setup, how I was working in the last 2 months during the pandemic. That's, for instance, during surgery, right? You see a normal surgical mask. You see my normal goggles. You see here a surgical gown, but I only use that in this case because it's a full sterile setup. And that's the question, what about surgery? Here's a surgical handpiece, right? And you see it's a total different game. The bigger drops, a lot less water in the air. And the whole story is the faster it spins, the more it creates a spray that can spread. You can see that here, droplets, 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 higher speed, and this all pops up into little droplets into the air. And when you reduce the speed, it's again bigger droplets. So what we can see here is with our speed, we directly influence what we do. And you know, I love digital assistant surgery. I love these meshes. I love to apply them, right? And what really helps, as well as the guided surgery. Now, this is a Bego system, and the mesh is distributed by Geistlich, so hi to the sponsors, right? And what you can see here when they're placed properly is with this digital support, we spend less time with the patient. And here comes the good news, or the bad news, whatever you want to do. Our spray is not that significant. It's water coming from our handpiece, shiploads of water. It dilutes, it's all everywhere, but our suction reduces that spray risk for us really, really, really good. And on the other hand, if we have a non-spray performing procedure, but the patient coughs at us only once, we run into real risk. So reducing the time with the patient is decisive. Louisa does these pictures with me. She's amazing in this. Right, and this is a very important study. I'll finish after that. Allow me to finish that thought, right? This is a very, very important study that showed in a lab experimental setting that aerosols, like aerosolized virus, can be infective in air for a couple of hours. So it's a very important study as it shows the theory. But if we look into the clinical studies, we have air samples around the patients, and none in both studies were proven to be infective. So that's exactly what we want to look at, right? In an experimental setting, yes, we can see an infective problem of aerosolized virus, but in a clinical life setting, no study could demonstrate it till now. Sorry, now I'm good.
No, that was brilliant. The one point I wanted to touch on there, Markus, and I mean, at the end of the day, this is a digital dental society. And I think you'll pretty much agree with me that, you know, all the stuff that we were doing pre-COVID-19, the diagnostics, the planning, the mock-ups, the modeling, You know, the minute you go into executing with your patient, the time that you take it's far less, and the work that you do is far more efficient. And you know, once again, you know, it just shows you that we're going through this pandemic. You know, everything that we were saying before the pandemic is pretty much going to be accelerated through this digital workflow. You know,
Absolutely.
It's going to be far quicker, far more efficient. You look at it on any level for that matter. I mean, everything that we were saying before the pandemic will pretty much be, it will almost become the norm post-op. So I'm very excited to hear about the digital workflow, always am. So I'm going to let you carry on with the mask.
Okay. So allow me to share my screen again, because that's sort of fits perfectly to that. Can you see me again, my screen?
Yeah, all good.
So that's the 3-layered surgical mask we were talking about as a standard tool, right? And very interesting, this review, it's a Cochrane review, stirred so many people up, but don't mistake that. It's not a science review, it's a review of recommendations of international organizations and professional bodies. And it was really interesting to read that. As you can see, that only 67% of all the sources indicate that all staff should wear face masks all the time. Now, we know that is the single most important procedure to protect you, your patients, and your staff from cross-infection. So why doesn't every official body recommend that? And on the other side, as you can see here, FFP2 or N95 recommendation is only in 50% of the sources. Only 33% of the sources advise a surgical hat. Now, I was always wearing a surgical hat even before that pandemic, even when I was not doing surgery, right? So this is so simple protection measurements. So what do we know? This is influenza research. From there, we know that respirators versus surgical masks have the same effect on protecting us. And it's very important to know that Corona, it's around for so long, it's the reason for at least 30% of all the influenza-like diseases out there. So that's what the second study looked at. That's from 2019, so just 1 year old. A very important study, because they also focused specifically on coronaviruses, right? And what they showed is that in a clinical setting, although in a lab setting, a surgical mask is always inferior to a respirator, but in a clinical real-life setting, there's no difference for N95s versus surgical masks. And here comes the holy grail, here comes Nature Medicine. And this beautiful study demonstrated very efficiently that a surgical mask prevents the spread of coronavirus very efficiently. This study also says that surgical masks were not made, and that's a very important thought, were not made to protect the guy who wears it, but to protect the patient from the surgeon, right? But here it comes very handy that it also protects us. Now here comes the bad news. And I quickly touched that topic already when we were talking about the avian flu. It's not 100% safe against influenza viruses. So if we have an avian flu outbreak, it's a different topic. But from the science, we can safely say that surgical masks are absolutely okay for everyday use. Just to demonstrate that to our patients, and makes us safe, makes them safe. But it's also very important to look at your local recommendations, right? There's countries where you have to wear at least N95 to practice.
Mark, I mean, I think you can comment on that.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, when we look at organizations, and I think, thank goodness, in South Africa we were kind of proactive in actually getting ahead and making, you know, sort of legislation or giving protocols to dentists that were within a reasonable ability for all of the dentists to follow, you know, and that they weren't totally restrictive, that it was impossible to actually carry on with doing what we've been trained to do with regards to masks. You know, I think one of the issues that I see with, obviously, you know, if there's no clear, this is exactly what you need to wear, is that I suppose that it's good to be slightly cautious at this point and maybe 6 months relax a little bit because we didn't see that there was a big problem. So, you know, I think that when we sat down and looked at the guidelines, we were slightly overcautious than undercautious, than being like, you know what, guys, we've been okay for 50 years. Let's just carry on. And so
I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
right.
that was
and
kind of
our recommendations here: if we treat a COVID-19 patient, then we have to wear N95s because we know they offer better protection, right? But I'll quickly share my screen again because that's actually a very important thought. Can you see it again?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is, Dr. Lozada pointed that out to me. That's a paper from Switzerland. There's actually rumors. It's nothing more than rumors, but there's rumors that the constant wearing of N95s might be not beneficial for our health. So I didn't find much on this, but this is a study on N95 type masks for pregnant healthcare workers. And they showed that there is probably maybe a long-term issue. So we're not talking about a day or a week that you wear that. But if we decide that for the remainder of our dental lives, N95 is the way to go, we have an issue. Furthermore, studies showing that the exhalation valve not only endangers our patients, as of course the air that comes from us is not filtered anymore, but it also doesn't relax our lungs, right? So we have N95s, and for instance, for tuberculosis patients, when we operate on them, we always wear N95s all the time. However, I'm concerned if this becomes the new standard in everyday dentistry. And if you do that, then I would sure suggest you need an individualized N95 that is made to fit your face perfectly, right? So that the bruising is not as extensive as it's quite sometimes seen for the regular N95s.
Absolutely.
I think one of the other big problems, and I'm sure it's been like that maybe in Europe, but I think one of the figures that we've had going around is that something like 75% of the masks that we're getting are actually not even, they're counterfeit. They're not even legitimate N95 masks. They've just appeared from China or from wherever, you know, with the number, and they're selling them.
Yeah,
that's the next problem, right? If you have a 3-layered surgical mask that you know you can trust the manufacturer, and on the other side you have a not trustworthy N95, you might be better off with the surgical mask.
Big problem.
I think 70% are actually not legitimate N95 masks. We're actually eligible with ones. I mean, it's crazy. So
it is.
In South Africa, maybe it's a little bit more, higher number than in Europe, I'm sure. But it's something that we have to think about. Just because you have a number, it's not helping you.
Nobody went into that question in Europe. And I think for good reasons, nobody even investigated that.
Yeah. I think they'd be surprised, to be honest with you, you know, when they find it. But I have to comment that I was given the task, Howie was on the same group, we wrote the protocols, and I was given the task for the suction element. And you know, after reading all the information, it was amazing how important really the suction is for us. You know, we for many years, maybe we didn't realize the benefits of high volume suction until now. It's been really put in the front, and how effective it is. That's for sure. But it has to be really efficient. So the capacity of the suction has to be good. The source, it's where the suction is. That's the key thing. So the further the suction goes from the handpiece, the bigger the problem. So I agree with you. All the devices that I see that are going further away from the source. And the funny thing is, actually, it's a laugh. So some of the most expensive systems actually are the most far away from the actual source. These ones that are taking.
Yep.
And just imagine, here's the source of the spray, right? Yep. Here's my face, and here's the suction device. Why should that come? I don't know.
And it's also
it's
taking, I mean, it's taking the aerosol out of the mouth, which is another big issue. You know, besides the fact that it's is a great distance, it's taking it out of the oral cavity. You know, we're safer keeping it in there as opposed to taking it out.
Exactly.
So one other question
This
that I'd really
all
like
shows us again.
to ask you is I think this is another gray area, but it's an area of concern, is the time that you're spending between patients, that you feel comfortable that when one patient leaves, that another patient can come into the room, apart from the cleaning of the surfaces, but just the quality of air, or is this an issue that you're concerned with?
I've focused on that extensively, right? And there's all those protocols out there. You all know Miguel Stanley, right? Great guy. And he formulated a slow industry approach several years ago. And he said 10 minutes in between the patient is needed to properly clean a room. And I was really there with a stopwatch in my office. Now we have the rule that every surface is swiped down before the next patient comes in. And all of a sudden, we're really very close to these 10 minutes. So there's quite some foreseeing element in what Mix did. Mix, if you're listening, hi.
Yeah, hi, Mix.
At the end of the day, it depends on the situation, right? At the end of the day, if you have just talked to the patient and everybody was wearing a face mask doing that, why wait? Right? If you performed a preparation of a tooth, then ventilation of the room is very important. And then it's just dependent on your facilities that you have, how long it takes. I'll quickly go into, wait, where is it? I'll quickly share my screen again, right?
And I don't know
if you see that?
Yeah.
So that's a study from 2005 that showed that our normal disinfectants work wonderful versus coronaviruses. And that's a very recent study from February 20 that also demonstrated very significantly that our normal swipes are totally fine. And that if we have the patient rinse with hydrogen peroxide, we have that for 1 minute at 1% before we start any procedure, it kills off a lot of the viruses. The same study also shows that chlorhexidine is not that efficient. And there's loads of studies back from the Spanish flu times that demonstrate very greatly that a good ventilated room by fresh air, I'm not talking expensive air purifiers, I'm talking opening the windows, reduces the cross-infection risk for airborne or droplet transmission significantly. Right, and we had this. We chatted about that. That the WHO right now doesn't recommend fogging. So if we look at fogging, I really tried to find efficiency comparisons, and I could find nothing. I found ultraviolet light, but mostly for water, and I found that of all the studies from hospitals, and you see that's 10 years old, so that's not a new question. That all those studies say an effective manual cleaning is the key, and then a gaseous disinfection can come on top if you wish, but the key is the manual effective cleaning before gaseous disinfection, and we know that manual cleaning is sufficient, right? The only exception, for instance, are situations like, for instance, aircrafts, where you just can't swipe the whole aircraft down. Here, it's very much recommended to disinfect by fogging. And anything else, this is a big study that looked at all those cleaning and disinfection methods in hospitals from 2016. And they looked into all those various substances that you can vaporize. They looked into ultraviolet light devices, everything. And the conclusion is manual cleaning is essential. And then, if you wish, you can talk about other things. And furthermore, when it comes to fogging, right, we know that there are health risks with that. This shows that there's an increase of asthma. And this one shows that it's a COPD issue. And there's loads of studies that highlight that problem. And that's another Ebola study, maybe a quick show, that shows that of the PPE that's used for Ebola patients, so these space suits, that swiping or spraying has the same efficiency, but by spraying you sometimes have the have the issue that you might even spray the virus away and spread it with that.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
So Marcus, coming back to the fogging, what is your view on hypochlorous acid?
We don't use it.
Okay.
We don't fog. We just don't do it. There's nothing in the literature that supports that we need to do that, but there is literature that we can actually harm ourselves. And interestingly, in the German health authorities, fogging and spray disinfectants are reserved for very, very special situations. Otherwise, you even should not apply them. And the more I interact with the literature, the more I understand this.
Yeah, I must say that my concern sometimes, and obviously this whole situation that we found ourselves in has been a great opportunity, and I'm not being negative at all, but it's a concern. But it's been a great opportunity for commercial sale of these things that have suddenly appeared in dental kind of markets for us to use, like fogging and that. And I'm not saying they're good. And my concern is that dentists will forget about the basic needs of cleaning, because maybe they have a fogger, and really think that they can relax all the other really important issues. So if they're dealing with all the really important issues, then by all means add this layer of protection. But please don't forget. Please don't forget about the really important things like washing hands, cleaning, cross-contamination. Because this really is the key, in my opinion.
And here's the danger, and you said it. The danger is that somebody buys a fogger and thinks, now I'm good, and forgets about the necessary stuff.
And that's where the risk comes in. So I mean,
yes,
that was a really, really informative conversation. I mean, I'm sure everyone really enjoyed it. I really did. And just to touch on a few things that we discussed, I mean, we showed the research around TB, we showed the research around influenza, we showed what happens, what's happened in our surgeries historically, and the risks that we were historically opposed to, and we were unaware of. We discussed face masks. We discussed the efficiency of a surgical face mask as opposed to the N95. Laboratory setting shows the N95 is superior. Clinical setting doesn't show much of a difference. Then we touched on the whole thing around fogging, and it all comes back to what we were saying from the outset, and what Markus was saying from the outset is that we really just need to keep things simple. We need to keep things clean. We need to keep things reproducible in the sense that what I'm doing for this patient today, I can do for the next patient and the next patient and the next patient, whether it's 6 months from now, whether it's a few days from now. And I think that consistency is far more important than trying to go completely over the top. And
absolutely.
And with all of this being said, I think it's been a great opportunity for us. It's been a great learning curve. But I think it's also going to be a great opportunity for people to get a lot more digitally and tech savvy, because at the end of the day, prior to all of this, we were always saying, time is important. People don't have time to waste. Our most expensive time is clinical chairside time. And we want to do as much of the planning. We want to do as much of the treatment planning in the background, so that when we get the patients in, we want to execute. We want to go from start to
time is money.
Time is money. And one thing I love out of this is the whole virtual communication that's happened. It's so much easier today communicating with somebody than it was 6 or 7 weeks ago. Everyone's become a lot more familiar with these platforms, and I think it's a huge opportunity for us to come onto our platform and to speak to us. I mean, we really, really appreciate it, and I can definitely tell you we're going to have it. Like I can see where this next discussion is going. We need to talk about BIGO. We need to talk about the surgical implant planning cases, because I'm super excited about stuff. So in a couple of weeks, I hope that we can get you back. We'll have some chats around that. Just to prepare you and warn you in advance. That's going to be our next discussion. That's where we go.
I'm looking forward. I'm much more comfortable talking about digital planning of augmentation and implant sites than questions. There's great questions that came in via the audience, right? Like, what's the viral load we need for inoculation? You know what? We don't know. We don't have a clue. At least I couldn't find it, and I tried to heavily research it. Some recycle. There's a question on recycling, right? I've honest, we haven't recycled yet because we're having good supply and we stocked up just before the crisis hit us. But we are prepared to recycle. So we save up masks that are used, and in case we have to reuse them, there's a protocol that was issued by the German authorities. We'll put them into a regular oven for 30 minutes at 60 to 70 degrees Celsius. And that should be efficient in cleaning that. But seriously, I don't want to do that. The idea is not nice.
But Markus, the one thing that I love about you is the fact that you're not a virologist, you're not an immunologist, you are a maxillofacial surgeon. You're at the front line, and in times like this where there's so little current information in terms of the actual virus we're dealing with. I mean, what better information to leverage on than anecdotal that's coming from a source that has gone and researched and looked at all the background and extrapolated as much of that information into the current situation. And that's special. And I mean, we really appreciate the effort you've put in. And I think you've had an impact I think you've had a global impact on dentists and dental practices. I can say that without a doubt. Everyone I've spoken to has mentioned your article, has mentioned the input that you've created. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
I just like to say that before this crisis, Christian, and he's a good friend of ours as well, Christian was the most famous guy, but now it's Markus.
100%.
No. I'm not even in the same league. Not even in the same league. You make me blush, guys.
How many webinars have you done in the last 6 weeks? How many webinars has it been? Have you lost count? You must have lost count.
I've lost it. It's more than 30. I mean, we did a rough count of the ones that had the most audience and the most people watching the replays, and that's more than 50,000 who watched that. It's absolutely crazy.
That's amazing.
That's unbelievable.
But that's because there's a lot of misinformation going around, and there's obviously a lot of commercial companies who are trying to feed us, to buy things, to scare us, without really looking at the science and what is the science that's available for us to make good decisions. I think that's been one of the most difficult things for dentists, at the moment, is that from every side they see another company trying to sell them something that's going to make their life safe, but clean the hands.
Just let me say that again. The hygiene measurements that we all should have followed in January 2020 and all the years before, if we follow them precisely, we're good. We don't need an extra cool device. You can do that if you wish, but only if you are meticulous with your basic hygiene. And honestly, you could see me walking around in my office with my face mask just pulled down right here, right? Worst situation to wear your face mask. But you could see me like this because I wasn't negligent. I just didn't care so much. And what I didn't understand, Germany and so many other countries, same as South Africa, has huge requirements for dentists in hygiene. And I sometimes felt more that this is pushing me and this is forcing me to do things that are unnecessary. Maybe just measures that are imposed on us to make our life harder. But now, with this crisis, I understand that high hygiene level that we were forced to maintain throughout all those years makes sure that we're safe even in this crisis. This is not a new virus. It's been researched since the 1930s. It's just a new, very aggressive strain that causes a very serious disease that we must not underestimate. But we know what we do helps, And if you look into the literature, as we just did, coronaviridae are featured in the literature, are featured in the hygiene protocols, not SARS-CoV-2 because it's too new, but beta coronaviruses, and that's where it belongs to, are featured. So nothing new here. Thank God, nothing new.
Thank you. Awesome, man.
Markus, thank you very much. And we'll make some plans, and we're going to see you back on our platform soon to talk about some digital planning and some BIGO. So I'm going to let you get some rest before your next webinar, and I'm already looking forward to the next one.
I'm coming to the Oktoberfest later in the year to see you.
Have you heard?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But what you can do, you can come over to my house. This is gin tonic and drink with me, guys. This is the utmost cool thing I could offer right now.
That's all we have.
Have a good day. Thanks for having me. Okay. It was a huge honor to meet you guys. And stay safe, stay healthy.
Thanks, Thanks, Markus. Thanks, Sam.
Bye-bye.